When the Pharisees, with some scribes who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around Jesus, they observed that some of his disciples ate their meals with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews, do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed: the purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds. So the Pharisees and scribes question him, "Why do your disciples not follow the tradition of the elders, but instead eat a meal with unclean hands?" He responded, "Well did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines human precepts.' You disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition." He summoned the crowd again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand that nothing that enters one from outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile. From within, people from their hearts, come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, folly. All these evils come from within, and they defile." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
For years, Brother Leo and I have enjoyed watching movies and TV shows together for recreation whenever we get the chance. And we watch all sorts of presentations, from action and adventure to science fiction to comedies. And a TV show that we are currently watching is Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is a series that concluded back in 2020. And it's a nice blend of action, adventure, drama, science fiction, and some comedy mixed in. And in the show, an intelligence agency that goes by the acronym S.H.I.E.L.D., and I won't pronounce that out for you, investigates strange cases involving people with extraordinary powers, and it attempts to maintain peace and order. And the agents that work for S.H.I.E.L.D. are generally good people, even though they might have some flaws or some faults of their own here and there. They work well together as a team and seem to even regard one another as members of one family. And they desire to attain what is good for other people who are interested in preserving human life and freedom. And the leader, Phil Coulson, treats the members of his team with dignity and respect, and allows them to freely approach him, even to question his decisions, or at least to gain clarification. And there's an overall sense of goodwill among them, despite any occasional fights or arguments that they might have with one another. And throughout the show, S.H.I.E.L.D. comes into contact with their primary nemesis, which goes by the name of Hydra. They are a secret terrorist organization with ties to the Nazi Party. And some of their members infiltrate various organizations, including S.H.I.E.L.D., to achieve their goals of world domination. And the way that the Hydra organization operates is very different from S.H.I.E.L.D. Whereas Agent Coulson leads S.H.I.E.L.D. with a more cooperative approach, where all the agents actively contribute to its leadership and operation, Hydra operates primarily through fear and coercion. Hydra prefers to motivate their agents by threatening them with suffering and death. And whereas S.H.I.E.L.D. agents tend to be more forgiving and less vindictive, Hydra leaders tend to seek revenge when they are wronged. If someone causes a Hydra leader to suffer in some way, the leader wishes to inflict that same suffering onto others, to make others feel the way that they have been made to feel. In contrast, a typical S.H.I.E.L.D. agent is more willing to forgive, and it wishes to prevent others from suffering in the same way that they have suffered. They do not want to inflict suffering onto others. And hence the actions taken by these two organizations, SHIELD and Hydra, reflect what is in their hearts. And this TV show, I think, is a nice illustration of our Lord's teaching today from the Gospel of Mark. The Pharisees confront Jesus on account of his disciples who have committed the unforgivable sin in the eyes of the Pharisees of eating with unwashed hands, thus disregarding the tradition of the elders. And Jesus seems exasperated with the Pharisees as he quotes from the prophet Isaiah, who says that these people pay lip service to the Lord, but their hearts are far from him. They disregard God's law while elevating mere human precepts as if they are more important than God's law. And this would be akin to a person calling out another person for jaywalking when that person who's calling them out has just robbed a bank. The Pharisees pretend to carefully observe every law and precept, and yet they are concerned with how they appear to others. Their pious exterior is only a facade, covering over the evil that is in their hearts. And Jesus uses this as an occasion to teach an important lesson about purity of heart. Oftentimes, a person will become fixated on externals and insist on following every detail of select laws and precepts, but they're very selective on the laws and precepts that they follow. And they do this as a way of covering over the evil that is in their hearts. They try to appear a certain way on the outside to others so that no one suspects them of the evil that they harbor within their own hearts and their minds. On a superficial level, they might appear to be holy, pious, and righteous because, for example, they keep a rigid schedule of prayer, they fast several times a week, and they constantly talk about God or the scriptures. All seems well on the outside. And prayer, fasting, and talking about the Lord are all good things. These are not bad things. But they can be used to conceal serious sin if we're not careful. And like the Pharisees, we can become self-righteous and think that we can do no wrong because we consider ourselves to be faithful. Instead of relying upon the Lord to justify us with his grace, we seek to justify ourselves. And thus Jesus helps us to understand what it is that truly defiles a person. A person is not defiled by failing to obey minor man-made rules and precepts. Now, this does not mean that these precepts are irrelevant or that they should not be followed, but that God's precepts are fundamental and they take precedence over human precepts. What truly defiles a person is the evil that comes from their hearts, such as what Jesus says: evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, folly. And those who strive to do what is good, right, and just might not be perfect. They have their own faults and their own sins. They might fail at times to do what is right, but their hearts are in the right place. Perhaps a person is a chain smoker and has arms covered with tattoos, and yet they are willing to drive miles away to rescue people who are stranded due to hurricane damage. On the other hand, we might see a person who spends hours praying in church and then later goes and mistreats a poor restaurant worker who is struggling to make ends meet. And I think Pope Francis says it well in an Angelus address that he gives on this passage in 2015. He says, Jesus focuses attention on a deeper aspect and states, there is nothing outside a man which by going into him can defile him, but the things which come out of a man are what defile him. In this way, he emphasizes the primacy of interiority, that is, the primacy of the heart. It is not the external things that make us holy or unholy, but the heart, which expresses our intentions, our choices, and the will to do all for the love of God. External behavior is the result of what we decide in our heart, and not the contrary. With a change in external behavior, but not a change in heart, we are not true Christians. Without a purified heart, one cannot have truly clean hands and lips, which speak sincere words of love. It is all duplicitous, a double life. Lips which speak words of mercy, of forgiveness, only a sincere and purified heart can do this. And so we would do well to reflect upon our Lord's teaching today and to examine ourselves according to the list of evils that our Lord provides. And if we are honest with ourselves, we should humbly admit any sinful tendencies that we might find in our hearts. Don't try to hide them. Reveal them. Allow the Lord to penetrate our hearts with his healing grace and to acknowledge those sinful tendencies within ourselves and to allow the Lord to purify them with his grace and his mercy. If we are holding on to unforgiveness, to bitterness, to self-righteousness, to irrational fear, to pride, or to any other harmful inclinations, we can bring them to the light of God's mercy and receive his healing grace. Only the Lord can take our broken, bitter hearts and transform them into his own loving heart. He can change us into people who do not wish to harm other people, but rather wish what is good for them and actively seek what is good for others. And we know that God desires not the death of the sinner, but that he might be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And through the working of God's grace, our own hearts can be transformed so that we too might desire what is good for our neighbor, most especially the salvation of souls.